Welcome back to another episode of STLT.
Hi.
Hi. Last week we showed you the installation of one of our best boat upgrades so far, the Hydrovane. And in that video I promised you we'd make another video where we talk a little bit about the why, how, which and the costs of wind vanes. So that's what we're going to do today.
By the way, everything that we're going to tell you now is based on own experiences and novice knowledge. So we know nothing about sailing and we know nothing about wind vanes, but you're still gonna watch it.
So let's start with the first and most important question. Why get a wind vane in the first place? We have a couple of reasons for why we wanted a wind vane, and the first reason is because it's an extra autopilot. And an autopilot gives you the freedom to do other things than steer the boat all the time. And that's just safer and more relaxed. Especially when you're single-handed, an autopilot is basically a necessity because you need to sleep, you need to go down and cook, or make a sail change, and then without an autopilot, you're going to be in trouble. The second reason is that a wind vane is a mechanical steering system, which means it doesn't need any electricity. And that's a good thing because if you need less electricity, you also can have smaller battery banks, or you can use the energy that you have for other equipment like your radar or your AIS or your plotter or maybe your fridge, or you have a nice cold beer. Also, imagine something happens to your electrical system. You get hit by lightning, or you don't have sun for 3 or 4 days because you have rain and then your batteries are not charged. If anything like this happens, your electric autopilot won't work anymore, but the wind vane is not bothered by any of this. It just needs a little bit of wind and further nothing. The third reason is that wind vanes tend to work better in higher winds, and most electric autopilots, especially when they're a little bit underpowered for your boat size, are going to get in trouble when it gets very windy and very gusty, and a wind vane won't have that much trouble with this. So when it gets tough and you kind of want somebody to take over for you, your electric pilot might not be able to handle it, and a wind vane won't have this trouble. So that's a very important reason for us why we really wanted to get a wind vane.
A few more reasons are the following, which I will lay out right now if you keep watching. Another reason is a wind vane doesn't hold a compass course, but the angle to the wind. And whilst some electric autopilots can also do that, it is the main feature of a wind pilot. Because imagine you're on a longer crossing and you get wind shifts between 10, 15, 20 degrees. You will change course, but your sail trim will always be correct because it will just keep the angle to the wind. That means you don't need to retrim your sails, and if you do not pay attention on a compass course, you might have fluttering sails or, worst case, a jibe. And that simply doesn't happen when you're following a wind course. So you might deviate from your destination, but at least nothing bad happens to your sails. Another reason is noise. Electric autopilots have a motor, and most of them a hydraulic ram. So oil gets pumped into this and the motor always does a buzzing sound, which quite frankly gets annoying after a day. And if you're on a crossing of 20 days, it will probably drive you mad. So the wind pilot doesn't have any of that. It's basically dead silent. But I think the most important reason is that it is technically maintenance free. So if you think about our electric autopilot, we have moving parts, we have electronics, we have the hydraulic system. So if that leaks, we have a problem. We need to top it up with oil.
Also, the thing is with the electric autopilots, especially when you use them for a long time in a row, there are just many like bolts and screws and hinges that can really chafe or get bad, and then you need to replace these. And first of all, that's quite expensive to do, and also a lot of work. And you don't really have any of these kind of parts on a wind vane, so that makes it way easier to maintain. When you are looking for a wind vane, it is good to know that you have a choice between two main types of systems. the auxiliary rudder system and the servo-pendulum system. There is now also actually like a merger between the two, but we're gonna just keep it simple for today. The auxiliary rudder system has what the name already says, an auxiliary rudder, and the servo-pendulum system actually uses the main steering of the boat. So it's connected to that and it doesn't have its own rudder.
The Servo-Pendulum system consists of three components: the wind vane, the underwater oar, and a linkage to the main rudder system of the boat. So the vane on top determines the angle to the wind and if there's a deviation to that. That then translates oar movement underwater, and that movement of the oar generates enough energy to move the main rudder of the boat. So the system uses the main steering of the boat and uses the force of the water. The auxiliary rudder wind vanes consist of two components, the wind vane and the rudder, and it generates energy from the wind. That's why the wind vanes with an auxiliary rudder have bigger vanes, because they need to get all this energy from a low energy content medium, the wind. Using an auxiliary rudder wind vane means that you lock your main rudder in place with no weather helm at all and then engage the wind vane, which then uses its own rudder to steer the boat.
When we researched this topic, we encountered a bunch of different brands. And of course, everybody has their preferences, their pros and their cons. And I can't really tell you which one is the best, because it probably also really depends on your boat, like how big it is, how heavy it is, the setup for your steering system, like do you have one or two rudders? So there's not really a best one out there. It depends on your boat. But the most well-known servo-pendulum brands out there are Aries, Cape Horn, Monitor, Wind Pilot, and then we also encountered brands like Fleming and a couple more. I actually found a very nice website where there is a bunch of all these brands listed with their features and their differences, and I'll link that one in the description down below if you want to know more about this, but I cannot really tell you that much about it. On the other hand, we have the auxiliary rudder system, and for that one I actually only found two brands, and there might be more, but the ones I found were then the Hydrovane and the Wind Pilot Pacific Plus. That's all that was out there, so it seems like this is either less popular or just less manufacturers make this one. Alright, so let's talk prices. The cheapest wind vane that we found was around 3,000 or 4,000 euros, and you can go up as high as 8,000 or 9,000 euros most likely, but this also depends a little bit on the size that you get. For example, for our Hydrovane, in the end, we paid just under 5,000 euros. And that was because we had this A bracket, which is quite an expensive bracket. And if you get the E bracket, that one is cheaper. We also had an M shaft and there's also an L shaft. You know, it's a component-based system. And I think that counts for most of the wind vanes. So depending on which components you get, the price, of course, differs. Also, a good tip. I told you that already in the last video, but we got the Hydrovane shipped to Gibraltar and picked it up as a yacht in transit, and therefore saved ourselves some VAT. And next to that, you are actually able, at least with Hydrovane, to pay in 4 different currencies. And for us, it was actually the cheapest to pay it in British pounds because the exchange rate was really good. So that saved us a couple hundred euros. Maybe a small tip for if you're looking for one. Of course, you can also try and save some money by getting one on the second-hand market. We have tried this for Hydrovane, but we honestly couldn't find a single one. Nobody really seems to sell it. And also with the Hydrovane, and I don't know how much it is with the other ones, it is pretty specific to your boat setup. So it might mean that you need to buy different struts, and that might still cost you some extra money. I did find quite some websites where people were selling like monitors and said that they bought one for maybe $500 or $1,000. So that could be an option if that's what you're looking for, but for the Hydrovane, this was not an option, unfortunately.
In our opinion, there are not many disadvantages of having a wind vane. If we'd have to name 2, then number 1 would be that you are only able to hold a wind course and you cannot hold a compass course. So if you are a very bad sailor and super lazy, you didn't notice that the wind shifted 90 degrees and you do not check your compass, then it might be that you are totally off course and you end up in a different country. I hope that doesn't happen. Number 2, it does take a lot of space on the transom. So if you're in the med a lot and you do med moorings, so your stern is on the quay, then it might be difficult or a nuisance, to say the least, to put your dinghy on the stern. So that is actually a problem for us. We wanted to do that, but now we can't anymore. We might find a way to hang up the dinghy if we are not using it, because then we can take the vane off. But if we engage the wind vane, then we'd have to find a way to store the dinghy somewhere else. All right, another disadvantage, it's really expensive.
So why did we then go with the Hydrovane in the end and not with one of the other models? Well, the first, and I think for us one of the most important reasons, was that we could place the Hydrovane off center. We have a aft cockpit and we get out of the boat in the middle. So if we have to put a wind vane in the middle of the transom, we won't be able to get off the boat anymore. So that was a very important reason for us. Another reason why we chose the Hydrovane is because it's the auxiliary rudder system. So it has its own rudder, and that is good for a couple of reasons. And the first one is that you mostly hear that when something goes wrong with a boat, when they're in trouble on a longer passage, it is often the rudder. So we thought having a spare rudder is a good thing. We don't want to be like hassling around with, I don't know, a door or a washboard to use that as a spare rudder when something happens with our main rudder. Also, the Servo-Pendulum system is connected directly to your main rudder system. This means, first of all, lines in your cockpit, which we didn't want because our cockpit is not that big and we don't want to have all these obstructions in there. And second, it will also mean there is more wear on your main rudder system, or you could set something up wrong and then break it in the first place. And if you just have two complete separate systems, there is less wear on the main one and you have a backup. Also, if for some other reason not just your rudder is damaged, but your entire main steering system blocks or breaks or something, then you can actually still use the Hydrovane as a steering system because it also has a tiny tiller. You can also put an extra autopilot on this tiller, so you basically have two entire separate systems that could also have two entire separate electric autopilots, which is pretty cool. Furthermore, we really liked the Hydrovane because it seemed like such a clean and simple setup. First of all, the way to install it seemed way less complicated than with the other vanes that we looked at. I mean, you've seen us install it last week. It was about 48-hour job and we had no clue and it went pretty well. In the end, we only had to drill 6 holes and that was it. There was no connecting things or putting extra parts somewhere. That was just all there was to do, and that clean setup was something that really sounded good to us. After researching a lot and reading experiences from other people, we found out that also the Hydrovane is really maintenance free basically. There is not really much that can break, and except for rinsing it off with some sweet water or, well, taking your rudder out and your vane off so they can't deteriorate, there's just not much you need to do. It is just such a sturdy thing. And we actually heard some stories of people that said, yeah, there's these single-handed competitions, and these people of course have wind vanes because how else are you going to be single-handed for a long time? And they've often had trouble with all kinds of wind vanes except for the Hydrovane. So apparently you're only allowed now to have a Hydrovane in this competition if you want to have a wind vane. Further, we met lots of people that had it and we read experience online, and they were just all so positive that we were convinced pretty quickly. One last reason that is actually something we didn't know before, but now that we know it, we're really happy that we decided to go with this one, is that Will and John and Sarah, the guys that sell the vane, they are super helpful and really friendly. I think Will, was it Will or John? Will actually Skyped with Alex a couple times and talked to him for sometimes an hour to talk about how to set it up and which parts we need and everything, and it was just so helpful, and the customer service they gave us is just so amazing, and that's worth a lot, especially knowing that if something happens we can always contact them easily and they will be very helpful. So thanks to the team. Sit down, Vista. So in last week's video we got a bunch of questions from you guys about the Hydrovane and how it works and how we came to certain decisions, so we thought we're just going to go through all of them and answer them. Can't you orient the vane 180 degrees and avoid bimini collision?
I can, but if I do not put the leading edge into the wind, but the non-leading edge, the rudder will do exactly the opposite of what I want. So on a certain course it will happen. But it doesn't really matter. It's just annoying because if the vane deflects enough, then that's a compromise that's working.
Also, by now we actually moved the bimini like a centimeter forwards, and it's actually not really touching anymore, I think.
No, we're winning.
Yeah, it works. Okay, next question. Will the bimini and spray hood disturb the flow of the wind and make the vane unable to steer?
No. No, because you will not sail 0 degrees upwind where the spray hood would potentially disturb the wind. You always sail with the degrees like 40 maybe.
Or
like
more, yeah.
40 or more.
Yeah.
And then the wind goes around the spray hood.
Also, it's really far away from the spray hood.
Also, it's really far away,
Yeah.
so there's still lots of wind going through the cockpit. And even if it's a bit disturbed, it doesn't really matter.
It's not really affected by it. Also because, one, the vane is really big. It will somehow catch most of the wind. And we mainly got the vane for longer passages. So that means we'll be going downwind, or at least a 90 degrees to 180 degree wind angle. And then it doesn't matter at all anymore.
Yeah, because it's the last part of the boat.
Yeah.
As soon as it's 90 degrees, there's 100% no obstruction.
It's neglectable, at least, yeah. Alright, so this one's kind of part of that. Have you noticed a difference in performance with the solar arch in place?
No, because the wind does not hit from the top of the solar arch, but from the sides.
Plus, we basically installed them at the same time, so we have no comparison. Do you have different sizes of vanes for different conditions?
No,
No.
no.
Just have the one.
There's just one vane, and it works in the standard setting 95% of the time. If you need to change it, then you can actually tilt it and depower it. Like if it oversteers and you have too much wind. Imagine this is the vane, and there's a high powered part here because there's a bigger angle. There's more power here than there's there. So if you tilt the vane this way, then the air that would have high power and push the vane just goes through, and you have less leverage on this kind of angle, if that makes sense.
It's kind of the depower mode. And then there's like a second part where you can depower the wind vane itself. Like we have like kind of a gear system in it.
There's a gearbox in the main system, so I'll explain it in a video that's coming up next week. But you can basically say for full deflection, less rudder angle, but more force. So that's something you'd use in higher winds, I guess.
And then you have the opposite setting, like when you don't have a lot of wind, then it will react a bit stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have more rudder deflection than in the normal setting on the same amount of deflection of the vane.
Yeah, so in the end it means that there's enough settings on the whole device itself that you don't need different sizes of vanes for that.
Yeah.
Does blue go backwards differently with a second rudder in the water?
Definitely. You can lock the rudder in place so it does not move.
That does help.
That helps a bit, but yeah, you have resistance going in. But usually
We take it out.
we take it out before we enter harbor.
It's the easiest. It's a quite easy thing to do. We just have a pin, take the rudder out, and we just put it back in the cabin, and then there's no obstruction at all. How difficult is it to trim the sail so the Hydrovane is able to steer successfully? And are there angles of sail that don't work well?
It's not really difficult because you set your sail like you would normally do, and people say that you need to trim it well for it to work, and that's true to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It's not like you need to be a super trimmer.
When we went down here to Lanzarote from Spain, it worked so easy. I mean, I thought it would be a lot harder to do it, but we got it right pretty quickly, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the very first time we sailed, when we passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, we had quite some trouble. We were going kind of upwind, and it was really gusty, and 45-degree angle of wind and 30 knots, something like that, and we kept being pushed to the coast.
No, I think that was because our boat wasn't ready to sail, because the whole bottom was crap and we were pushed.
True, the bottom did not help with anything.
Yeah.
So that was the only time we had trouble with it. It was the very first time, but after that it
Also,
worked.
we tried it at night for the first time.
At night with 30 knots of wind, but after that it was easier than I thought it would be. Okay, so what are the lightest conditions it works in?
I don't know.
That's a very good question.
I don't know. How did you plan the wind vane? Does it have to be centered in the middle behind the rudder? Does it not affect performance when heating over?
The Hydrovane does not need to be exactly centered. That's one of the reasons we actually got this model, is because we can put it off center and it still works really well. Also, if you do place it directly behind your rudder, I read you only need about 20 centimeters of distance between the main rudder and the rudder of the Hydrovane. So that shouldn't affect the performance, and it should still be no issue at all. And the other one was if it affects performance when we heel over, right? Do you want to answer that one?
The rudder of the Hydrovane is quite long, and we put it very close to the waterline, so there will be enough rudder in the water when heeling the other way.
Also, if you wanted to come out of the water completely, it should be all the way on the side.
Exactly, it needs to be on the side.
And it's not that far to the side. I mean, we put the Hydrovane off center, but not...
Yeah, it's maybe this far.
Yeah, it's not that far from the middle.
If you're heeling like that, then the amount of rudder that's out of the water is this much.
It's not much, yeah.
And no, that's easily handled. That's no.
So no, at least not with the way we installed it.
Next question. I would not trust the cable ties owing to UV degrading the ties.
Yeah, there
wasn't a question.
No, that was my mistake. When I put the cover of the vane on the frame, I said that you can use cable ties to tie it up. It was a bit dumb because actually you use the cable ties only to make it really tight, and then you use a proper line to really tie it up. So there are no cable ties on the vane anymore. It's a UV resistant thread.
Are you sure about melting together the endless line?
Yes.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
Yeah, that's in the instructions and it works. And it's perfect.
What are you going to name your new crew member?
That's a good question, right?
Yeah, we haven't yet.
Yeah, we're not
Write it in the comments.
Yeah, we're not so good with these things.
No.
We also never named the dinghy, and I wanted to rename the boat, but Alex didn't, and I also didn't have an idea for a new name, so we're not so good with the names. No. So if you have any great ideas, let us know. We'd be happy to review them. I think that was all the questions, right?
That's it.
That's it. If you have any more, let us know. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of our boat transformation, or you are interested in how the Hydrovane and other wind vanes work technically, then subscribe. Because Alex is going to explain that in the next one.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah? You okay with that?
Yeah.
Now we still need to do one part.
Which one?
Well, we chose the Hydrovane.
Can't you just do that?